Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Today on Pivot on Hilaal TV, I'm very honored to have an amazing guest, a guest who is specifically from one of the most beautiful countries in the world, and that is Malaysia. Azra Banu is a founding member of a number of local NGOs since the early 2000s. These include Orphan Care, Viva Palestina Malaysia, BDS Malaysia, Care Refugees, where she is also the chairperson. She has been to Gaza on 2 humanitarian trips. She is from Singapore but lives in Malaysia. She is also the founder and teacher of a private school, and she has been teaching there since 2006. For me, it is a real honor to speak to somebody from that part of the world, because I think in recent times we've been having lots of conversations with people, but we forget that the significant amount of Muslims live in the very Far East, in Indonesia, in Malaysia, and we're not having those conversations with them to hear what it is that is happening there. How do they perceive what is happening in the rest of the world, and how can they contribute towards changing the global geopolitical landscape through the activism and the engagement that they are having with their local governments. So with that, I'd like to say Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, Sister Azra. Thank you so much for being here and for making this time.
Wa alaikum salam, and thank you for having me.
Azra, it's fascinating because I really, in all the time, I think it's been a year now that I've engaged with so many people, but we have really not engaged with people from the very Far East. And Malaysia is a massive Muslim population. We forget, when people talk about Muslims, they think, it's located in the Arab world, and that the majority of Muslims are in the Arab world, yet they are the minority. The majority of Muslims come from Pakistan, from Malaysia, from Indonesia, and Turkey. These constitute the major populations of Muslims, but there is a very, shall I say, absent. I don't know if it's intentional or it's the fact that you're so far and nobody focuses on you, but there's an absence of that voice in the political sphere, in the global sphere, and even in terms of the way in which things play out that affect Muslims. For example, what do Malaysians feel about Gaza, about Palestine, about the occupation of Palestine, and what are Malaysians doing about that?
It's funny you should say that, because I listen to quite a bit of discussions online, podcast. I just love podcasts, right? And lots of what I listen to, the focus is very Eurocentric or US-centric. And I remember meeting a number of these sheikhs from the US, from the UK, back in Kuala Lumpur, and commenting on that. I said, so much discussion on Islamic affairs is either Eurocentric or American-centric, and forgetting that in our part of the world, we've got experts, we've got scholars, we've got people who can contribute intellectually to many of these discussions, but they're either overlooked, they're not aware of these scholars. So it's funny you should say that. Regarding how do Malaysians feel for the Palestinians, by and large, I would say overall, there is great support, as you would know, in Malaysia for the Palestinian cause. People feel very strongly, very passionately about it. Malaysia contributes in many ways humanitarian relief work, political statements. They're at the forefront in our region, at least. However, I have to say that a lot of this support comes from the Muslim segment of the society, and we could do with a wider support base from Malaysians in general. So we're working towards that. My NGOs, there's Viva Palestina Malaysia, BDS Malaysia, and we're working towards increasing, widening our support base to not just among the Muslims, but also from outside that sphere. Having said that, I would like to just mention a little bit about Singapore, where I am from. I'm from Singapore. I live in Malaysia. I've been living in Malaysia 37 years now. And sport in Singapore has been very encouraging among the general public as well. As you would probably know, Singapore tends to be on the side of Israel. For all these years, they're allies. However, with this recent genocidal attack on Gaza, you can see a slow shift in public opinions, in discussions, and that's a very heartening and healthy development. There's still a long way to go. It's a good start. It's a long way to go still, but it's a good start.
That's fascinating that you say these things, and also that you opened up for the fact that the discussions are mostly Eurocentric, and that many of the scholars, both in the Arab world and in the Western world, I think either don't have confidence in, or they themselves suffer from an inferior complex, where they do not recognize the talent, the potential, the capacity and the capability within our own, cultural groupings, within our own spheres of influence, and people who can make a significant contribution. And that's part of the reason where I find that the Muslim Ummah generally is still very much shackled by the violence of Western civilization, colonized, and our Islam has also been colonized. And that's why we're struggling where we are right now in terms of Gaza, that we have more than 2 billion Muslims, and all we can do is just look at what is happening in Gaza. So for you, how do you envisage a way forward to break through those shackles, the colonized Islam, the colonized mindset, etc.? And as an educator, does this feature prominently in the way in which you shape curricula, and so to take them, the younger minds forward into a new world, into a new way of imagining, where the humanity of all people, where the intelligence of all people, where the contributions of all civilizations are considered, and we're not just stuck in this concept of a superior Western civilization?
That comes down to instilling this sense of self-confidence, self-worth, and self-esteem in our children. It must start very young. I teach children from the ages of 7 to 14. I see the same child from the age of 7 till 14. I don't teach the older kids after that. And I see this transformation in them from this eager, enthusiastic child who comes into school at 7, and then the transformation, the metamorphosis that the child goes through. And by the time I see that same child when he's a teenager, 13, 14, and the transformation is unfortunately not positive. They become withdrawn and they become quiet. No longer, I don't see the zeal and the enthusiasm in them anymore. And I think it comes down to one, of course, being teenagers, right? But secondly, it's our education system is still insular. We're still looking within and not without. On my part, I teach them once a week. I have a subject that's outside of the school curricula. It's a subject that was developed by the founder of the school. He was an American psychologist and scientist. So I teach what I learned from him. I teach the students. So that gives me lots of leeway, freedom to do what I want in class. And many times I bring Muslims in from other parts of the world. These are generally people I know personally, young adults, to come in and talk to the students about this beautiful world of Islam and Muslims that we have outside of the sphere that we live in. And I hope through that, I'm planting these seeds within them, right? And of course, I'm always talking about glorious history, warts and all, to be honest, not just the the beauty of it, but warts and all. And the Prophet, of course, is a role model, right? In my little ways, I'm trying to do this, and I'm sure other schools, other institutions are doing their bit too, but honestly, it'll take us a little bit more time before we're able to break out. I'm talking specifically from our local context in Malaysia. It'll take us a little bit more time before we can actually break these shackles that you were talking about.
So before we go to a break, we have just like about a minute, and I want to know that you touched on the Prophet as an example, and it being Rabiul Awwal. What has been, a significant historical lesson for you, or an episode in the history and the life of the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam that has impacted the way in which you have changed your life, chosen your career, perhaps, or even use that example in the environment in which you are in?
I 6 years ago, I wrote a Seerah for children based on Sheikh Yasir Qadhi's lecture series, 104 lectures. I listened to it twice over to write the Seerah. And I opened it. The first page, I still remember on the first page, I asked the readers, that is the children, 9 to 12-year-olds, and I asked, what is it about him that made his companions love him beyond their own selves? They were ready to sacrifice their own life for this man, right? What about him that made him so special a person, a leader, that even we, 1,400 years later, we love him more than anyone else, right? And I think that is the quality in him that I would love to emulate, that he inspired not loyalty. It was loyalty out of love, obedience out of love, right? That to me, that quality surpasses everything else about him. Personally, that would be it.
So we're going to a break, but this is very fascinating because you have touched on love, and you say that is, if you look at Islam and you look at the Prophet, then you see the notion of love. Yet the way in which the Western civilization, the Western propaganda, and the Western media portray Islam is the total opposite. They portray us as a people of hatred and of violence. But we're going to come back to that because I'm interested in your Seerah. We'll talk about the Seerah when we come back. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the second segment with our sister Azra from Malaysia, and we're speaking about the influence that Muslims can have on politics, on character, and of course in just shaping the way in which the Ummah can go forward by the small things that we do. And Sister Azra spoke to us about the Seerah that she wrote for children after listening to Sheikh Yasir Qadhi. Her opening, of course, was on love. So Azra, that for me is very special. You speak about love, and this is how you start the Seerah. Tell me a little bit about your Seerah book, and what is it about this book that is different from other Seerah books, and how do you expect that it will change the way in which children who interact with this particular work, this literary work, will then see Islam and understand the Prophet?
Another one of my NGOs where I'm a founding member is Muslim Professionals Forum. In fact, that was the first that we established, I think, very early on, many, many years ago, over 20 years ago. And each year we would conduct workshops for children just before Ramadan to sort of prepare them spiritually, mentally, into welcoming Ramadan and making it the best one each year, best one ever, right? So each year becomes better and better. And I would create this Ramadan journal, a 30-day journal where children would they'd have a checklist every day, and sometimes I'd include short stories or puzzles, or just to keep the young ones engaged in the month of Ramadan. And in 2018, incorporated the Seerah of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam into this journal. So each day of Ramadan, I incorporated a bit of his Seerah, from the point of his birth to the point of his death, incorporating his nature, his character, his personality, but also his life story, right? What I wanted out of that Seerah was for the children at the end of Ramadan to get to know him better than when they first started Ramadan. So that was back in 2018. That was my intentions. How do we increase our love for him? I asked the kids. Well, we increase our love for him by getting to know him as much as we can, by getting to know him intimately. So I wanted the Seerah to sort of resonate with them personally, that at the end of 30 days, they would say, okay, I now know my Prophet a little better than 30 days ago. That was my objective.
Now, considering that you're so focused on the minds of young people, this is a hypothetical question, and of course it will vary based on your own understanding. Do you think there is a responsibility and obligation on parents the world over to make them aware about what is happening in Gaza, in Palestine, to teach them about occupation and about oppression? Because I've heard so many parents saying, no, don't show them the Instagram, don't show them these videos, they're too gory, these images are too bad, we don't need to talk about this. And they shift then to something, artificial or superficial, etc. In dealing with a young man, I know there's many things that one has to consider, but how would you approach this?
It's got to be age appropriate. I talk about this to the kids at school. The other teachers talk about it to the kids at school. Because of my Palestinian activism, my students cannot separate me from the Palestinian cause. Each time I go into class, I carry a boycott Israel bag, right? If the Palestinian flag clearly displayed. So they cannot separate me from Palestine. My students just can't. And each time they have lots of questions. So they'll ask me questions from the ages of 7 to 14, and I just make it age appropriate. I'll relate an incident to you. I've just arrived in Melbourne, where my daughter is, and just a couple of days ago, I was in the car with my granddaughter, who will be 7 in December, and I was telling her that I'm compiling a collection of short stories for children. I've written them actually. Now they just gone for illustration. And set in Gaza, right? Based on actual incident or an image I might have seen, but set in Gaza. So I was relating a couple of stories to her, and each story had a child who has been displaced, the house been bombed, reduced to rubble, living in a tent, finding food, a scarcity. And my granddaughter at 7 understood that very clearly. It was to me, it was sad that at 7 she was used to this harsh reality of what life in Gaza is, right? That to me was the sad bit about it. But at the same time, she knew exactly what I was talking about. She knew exactly what I was describing. And I think on our part as parents, as educators, it's important for us to plant these seeds in our children, in our young generation, that all of us owe something to this cause, that this cause must be within all of us. All of my children, 4 of them, they're now in their 20s and 30s. And, well, 3 of them are in their 30s and 1 in the 20s. They've not grown up without this cause being spoken about at home. And I don't think we should sanitize it. Do not show them gory pictures. I don't think we should do that either. But don't sanitize it. Don't gloss over it. Don't tell them, don't distract them when they're asking questions about Gaza. Be honest, be factual, again, keeping it age appropriate.
So from this then, you're a part of BDS Malaysia. What is the role of BDS Malaysia, and what are the victories that you've had? What are the challenges that you've had? And especially now, it's almost a year since the genocide. Has there been a change in the way in which the Malaysian population has interacted with BDS Malaysia this time around compared to previous times?
So BDS Malaysia has been around some years now, but it really shot to fame when there was a global boycott of McDonald's, where McDonald's sponsored food for the Israeli occupying forces, right, early on in the attack. And what McDonald's Malaysia did was they decided to sue BDS Malaysia because they said we called on people to boycott them. The irony is we never called on people to boycott McDonald's. Boycott McDonald's came about sort of organically. It was a mass movement of people globally, right, due to the actions of McDonald's in Israel and another one in the US. And because of that, we gained lots of attention. And now people know much more about BDS Malaysia. And so now we're promoting BDS Malaysia follows the guidelines of the BDS movement, the global BDS movement. So our targets are the similar targets. So, for example, Puma is on our list, Caterpillar, Caltex, and a few other brands. So we go by what BNC recommends, few targets at a time, not a massive list of hundreds and hundreds of targets. We go by what we call targeted boycott. So it's achievable. You increase your rates of success when you're focused on a few, and rather than hundreds of them. Well, what successes have we seen in Malaysia? Malaysia is unique in the sense that we do not have direct trade relations with Israel. So you're not going to have products made in Israel, for example, right? But we are going to have products that sort of support the occupation one way or another. Like I just mentioned, Caterpillar is responsible for the demolition of homes and the building of settlements. So that's a clear target. So we are trying to get the corporate body that is that supports Caterpillar to stop, to divest sort of from Caterpillar. So our targets are such targets, not consumer-based targets. So it's very different. Popularity-wise, yes, we have gained traction in the past 10 months, I would say. And I believe we will continue to gain traction for as long as the genocide is ongoing. BDS is quite popular at the moment in Malaysia.
So we're at the end of this particular interview, and I have a last question to ask you, and that is there a political shift in Malaysia to be more, staunch in terms of holding Israel to account? Is there tangible actions that Malaysian people, the Malaysian political sphere, Malaysian leader, etc., have decided that, it's time for Malaysia to really forcefully exert its voice onto the global sphere to say enough is enough, and Malaysia is going to lead in this particular way? Or is Malaysia also just taking a stand back and waiting for everybody else to do something, but then supporting it? Of course, we know that they do support it. They're part of the OIC, and so there's been a uniform and a unanimous decision from there. But in the past, Malaysia very often came out as the first voice, but recently we're not hearing that first voice. So what is happening inside of Malaysia?
I'm gonna just sort of guess the gist of your question, because the line wasn't very clear. But yes, Malaysia has been rather vocal since the attack took place. The current Prime Minister has been quite strong with his words against Israel and against what's happening in Gaza. Can Malaysia take a stronger stand? I guess there's always room for a stronger stand, right? There's always room to improve. But we have to still keep in mind that it's a small player within the grand scheme of things. And I think the leadership also understands that strong words are not going to carry as much weight as, say, a main player in the grand scheme of things. So I think the leadership understands that.
Thank you so much for this insight. We're at the end, and I appreciate everything that you've brought to the table today. I wish you every success with BDS and with all the other NGOs, and I'm sure that you're looking forward to another trip. You've been on 2 trips to Gaza. May Allah make it that you are able to go on a 3rd one and to do something positive for the people of Palestine. So with that, fi amanillah, wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. And I'd like to say to the viewers, thank you for watching this, and perhaps we can start engaging more with people in Malaysia, in Indonesia, in Turkey, to start hearing the other Muslim voices. Till we meet again, fi amanillah, wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.